This was my third year in a row to attend the World Economic Forum. It is a gathering of globalists and billionaires and heads of state. The people at the World Economic Forum kind of represent a singular political view, and that view is globalism. The average WEFer, they always think in terms of the masses. They think in terms of the millions, the faceless masses that are out there, not in terms of the individual, not in terms of actual people. The World Economic Forum itself, their slogan is improving the state of the world. So again, it's the way revolutionaries think. They want to change absolutely everything rather than actually doing the hard work of affecting lives one at a time. What I'm trying to do when I'm at the World Economic Forum is be as inconspicuous as possible. You see, I'm not there with any crew. I'm just there by myself. And I'm just moving amongst the WEFers. I'm just moving amongst them, having conversation with them. When you're just having a chat with a guy, over coffee, you speak much more freely. And that's the unfiltered stuff that I get that I find very, very useful. They tend to be people that I think of that are quite naive as to what the World Economic Forum's ultimate agenda is, which I say, at least in part, is Welcome to another episode of Ideas Have Consequences with me, Larry Alex Taunton, and I am reporting to you from Rome, Italy. I'm sitting in the restaurant of my hotel, and there's a lovely woman here who is preparing for dinner. You'll probably hear some clanging dishes, some things like that are going on in the background, but they've been so accommodating to me here in this hotel to allow me to use this space in order to speak with all of you. Now, what I plan to do in today's episode is this is going to be kind of a WEF wrap-up. What you were able to see in last week's episode was a kind of mashup of the many interviews that I did. Now, I did a lot more than were included in that particular episode, and there will be more that will be included in this episode. But this is my opportunity to really speak to you directly, not just to an interviewer, but to speak to you, the posse, and explain to you a little bit of my experiences in Davos just last week. Now, one of the things that I would want to convey to you is, that it is, kind of a remarkable experience. This was my third year in a row to attend the World Economic Forum. And of course, it is a gathering of globalists and billionaires and heads of state. So I haven't seen the figures from this year. In fact, those figures that I have seen, I think they've exaggerated because this year attendance was lower. And it was definitely lower from heads of state. But last year, you had 50 heads of state, 115 billionaires, and about 600 CEOs of major corporations, and then about 2,700 other attendees. This year, you only had one attendee from a G7 nation, and that is the outgoing president of Germany. The others were not there, and some have taken from this that the WEF is in decline. And I'm going to come back to that. That's a theme that we will address in this episode of Ideas Have Consequences. But there's no question that because Trump was being inaugurated at the same time that the World Economic Forum was taking place, that it did affect things. And it affected its attendance. So, for instance, you had guys like Bezos and Zuckerberg. They were not at the World Economic Forum. They were in D.C. kissing up to Donald Trump. And they're just some of the more prominent ones who are doing that. There's a number of others that we could point to that fall into that category. But I want to begin really today by taking some of the questions that people have submitted on YouTube, on Twitter, elsewhere to me as it relates to this, because it'll help me address some of the issues that seem to me to come up and again as it relates to the World Economic Forum. The first question is this: why hasn't Trump declared war on the World Economic Forum? What if you mean war in the literal sense? I mean, the World Economic Forum isn't a state. It doesn't have an army. It doesn't have a territory. So it is stateless. What it is it's a conference. It's a gathering place 4 heads of state, 4 heads of corporations who have bought into the globalist ideology, or are just there, to sell stuff. I mean, the World Economic Forum, as I've pointed out, there are really 3 tiers to that organization. So at the top, you have the, as we say on this show, the ideologues, the idiots, the ideologues, who are the true believers in the ideology and are drivers of it, who are pushing it in a big way. Then you have just below that, we have a bunch of vendors who are there in order to sell something. One of them, for instance, might be a country. So I spent a fair amount of time talking to a representative of the Indian government because India was there to sell India. They were there hoping to garner business from some of these major corporations that are there. They're trying to attract industry to their country, which is, a smart thing for them to do. But you also have others who are there to try to sell, say, some technology like artificial intelligence or robots. There were displays of these kinds of things. I'm walking through the street. There's one of these robot dogs that's doing tricks and this sort of thing. And it looks, kind of funny and cute, but it actually is quite sinister when you get right down to what it actually is. And then you have at the bottom level, so again, 3 tiers. At the bottom level, you have the masses who are attending, who tend to be idealistic. They tend to be people that I think of that are quite naive as to what the World Economic Forum's ultimate agenda is, which I say, at least in part, is depopulation. I've demonstrated that in other episodes of Ideas Have Consequences where I lay out for you in fact, I did one, I think within the last month, where I was laying out for you the key documents that have influenced the formation, the founding, the formation, and the ongoing ideology of the World Economic Forum. So you can take a look at some of that. Some of you are asking me questions about things related to the World Economic Forum that I've dealt with in previous episodes. So I'm trying to move on and advance the argument just a little bit here in this particular episode. But that's the reason why he hasn't declared war on it. Another reason is because he's seeking to have influence with these individuals. So, for example, when Trump addressed the World Economic Forum via, a Zoom call or something like that on Thursday, the day before the last day of the World Economic Forum, some have characterized that on social media and in other news outlets as a beatdown. And he went and he really told them off. And it was a real bare-fisted kind of presentation for Trump. I watched it. It wasn't. Trump was quite presidential. Now, he was very firm in stating that he's not a globalist, that his administration is not globalist, that they will insist on fair trade agreements, that they will insist on their sovereignty, the sovereignty of the United States being respected and our borders being respected. He stated all that very clearly. But I thought he was actually quite presidential and exceedingly restrained considering what he might have said. So he was actually quite complimentary to many of the gathered who were there. Now, some of you have taken from that conclusions that I think they're deeply erroneous. But I think he was using the bully pulpit of the presidency of the Oval Office in the right way. And there's a couple of ways of doing that. One way is to really bully, which is what he did with the president, Gustavo Petro, the president of Colombia, who said he wasn't going to accept any flights of illegals, Colombians being returned to his country. And Trump tweeted very quickly and made it pretty clear what he was going to do if the president of Colombia wanted to play hardball with him. And you saw the president of Colombia absolutely crumble, under that, quite embarrassingly, actually. And the president of Colombia, just so you know, he is a former Marxist terrorist and murderer. I mean, in real life, I don't mean that as hyperbole. I mean, he was an honest to goodness, real Marxist terrorist. So Trump, I think, dealt with him in a very effective way. But when you're talking about G7 nations, I think he has to take a slightly different approach, and that's approach to do what he does best, which is to make deals, to persuade, and to also use the coercive power of the Oval Office. So I think that that his approach was really quite effective in stating firmly his agenda moving forward, but at the same time, making it clear that that he sought to have conversation, that he wanted to have fair trade agreements, that he hoped to do business with all of them, and that he hoped that it could all move forward in a very peaceable, sensible manner. I personally found it to be quite refreshing. And also, again, given the fact that a lot of the people who are gathered there have said some really terrible things about Donald Trump, but he was really quite gracious in the way he dealt with that. Next question here. By talking to the WEF and saying he plans to attend next year, Trump has betrayed his base. No, he hasn't. Some of you have said things like he's a globalist. He's not a globalist. Trump is definitely not a globalist. By me attending the World Economic Forum, am I betraying the posse? Well, of course not. I'm going there in order to report to you on what's taking place there. He's going there with the agenda of persuading attendees. That's what he wants to do. He wants to have influence, and Davos is a good place to do it because that's where these people are gathering. Next question. By telling us all of this, haven't you blown your cover? That's an excellent question. And it would seem like it might, because you're thinking, here I am on an episode of Ideas Have Consequences, laying out for you what I plan to do and telling you what I've done in the past. But if I were to tell you the one thing that all these people have in common who attend the World Economic Forum, it's arrogance. These are people who live in a bubble. They live in an echo chamber, and they don't listen to contrary opinions. The likelihood of any of them watching Ideas Have Consequences is about zero. But even if they did, let's just suppose that they decided that they were going to stop Larry Taunton and that Larry Taunton wouldn't be able to, to attend. Well, okay, so you stop me from entering the buildings, you stop me from entering, conference rooms and that sort of thing. You can't keep me out of public spaces. You can't keep me out of coffee shops, restaurants, hotel lobbies. And that really is where the interesting conversations take place. And that's why I say to you that the World Economic Forum, although the agenda is different and that you're talking about a specter-like organization that has some sinister, megalomaniacal kind of goals, the fact of the matter is the way it functions is like any other conference. And if you've attended one for your own career, for your own work, or your church or something like this, you have people speaking in a variety of locations, and other people who are gathered in lobbies and restaurants and so forth, where they're chatting with each other. And that's where the really interesting stuff takes place. And they can't keep me out of any of that, even if I wasn't able to crash, any of the other meetings. And just so you'll know, 70% of the World Economic Forum is online anyway. So in some sense, telling you what's happening in the actual presentations isn't really what you need me for, because you can watch, most of that. It's the conversations, the quiet conversations that are taking place in various corners of Davos. And I'm there to listen to a lot of that. So let's just say some higher ups, want to prevent me from coming. Their attendees are not going to know who I am. They're not going to, although I have to tell you this is very funny. And the husband and wife to whom I refer, unfortunately, I do not know your name, so I'll just simply say hello. But I was walking across Davos and I hear someone shout out, "It's Larry Taunton." And I thought, oh, hell, the WEF are actually on to me. And it turned out to be a member of the posse, somebody who was from the UK. He was a bus driver. He had brought this coach full of WEFers to Davos, not because he himself was a WEFer, but because he was required by his job to bring them there. And he said that his wife told him, "You need to look for Larry Taunton. He's going to be there." And what do you know? He saw me and he shouted out. And we had a good laugh and a good chat. Now, there are things that I do not reveal to you on here. Just in case, one of them is watching. I am sure not to say certain things. But me attending, me talking to people in lobbies and coffee shops and that kind of thing. Okay, I don't really care whether they know that because they can't stop that. I mean, they just can't. And again, my strategy is a little different. I keep saying this, but it's worth repeating. There are other news outlets, some of them conservative news outlets, and they're there as reporters. That means they're there, with their mics, they're using their mics out on the street talking to people. We're going to show you one Dutch crew that I thought was hilarious, some of the stuff that they were doing. And they're a news crew and they're out on the streets. That's not what I'm doing. You see, I'm not there with any crew. I'm just there by myself. And I'm just moving amongst the WEFers. I'm just moving amongst them, having conversation with them, which gives me something very different. So I'm not saying that what I'm doing is better than what the news crews do. They give you something else that's very good. I'm giving you something that's a little more honest in the sense that they're not giving me prepped responses because they don't know that I'm really interviewing them, if you understand what I mean. And somebody comes and puts a mic in your face, you're very careful with what you say. When you're just having a chat with a guy, over coffee, you're not. You speak much more freely. And that's the unfiltered stuff that I get that I find very, very useful. But no, I don't think I have blown my cover. Next question. How are you able to get into these meetings? Don't you have to pay? Don't they require identification? It is an amazing thing. The World Economic Forum, which is a bunch of technocrats, they are all into artificial intelligence. They're pushing technology without brakes on every front. And yet the World Economic Forum itself is analog. It is the most non-digital conference imaginable in the sense that you have people standing in doorways with clipboards and people are wearing lanyards, that say World Economic Forum on them. It's very old school in that regard. And that's why I'm able to get into a lot of these meetings because I can just simply walk past a lot of these people like I belong there. And because it's wintertime in the Swiss Alps, people are wearing, big coats. So it's easy for people to assume that you have a lanyard. It's just not visible. It must just be under your jacket because most of the time they are. People don't have them, out over their jacket. They have it, on, say the way I have it now, and then they put a big coat on over that. So frequently the lanyards themselves aren't visible. Ironically, who almost caught me this time? A couple of Swiss high school students. I was walking behind them on the sidewalk, and from behind, because they were quite tall, they looked older than they were. And I said, gentlemen, could I ask you a few questions about why you're attending the World Economic Forum? And they turned around, and I see these peach fuzz, mustaches, which were quite hilarious. And I could immediately tell they're, 15, 16 years old. And I lost interest, but they wanted me to interview them anyway. So I thought, okay, well, I'll chat with them. And so I did. And they began asking me, where's your lanyard? Do you have a lanyard? Where's yours? Where's yours? And I cut off the conversation. I moved on. But I thought it's funny. In the 3 years that I've attended, no one has ever asked me that question. But now I get asked it by a couple of Swiss high school students. Next question. Trump and Musk are members of the WEF. Both have been there. They're not members. But yes, both of them have been there. Dinesh D'Souza, I just did an interview with Dinesh, and Dinesh pointed out that he was invited to come and speak, and he went. If I was invited to speak, I would definitely go. Javier Milei, he was there, and he spoke, and he put a beat, and he did, by the way, put a beat down on the WEF. His was absolutely unrestrained in what he had to say. Ladies and gentlemen, a big part of my work and my philosophy, and I know this characterizes a few others, is if I get an invitation to go and speak to some leftist organization or institution, I'm there. That's where I want to go. Those are the people I want to get in front of because those are the people I disagree with, and those are the people who disagree with me, and those are the minds I want to change. Well, in the same way, you have non-globalists who want to get in front of these organizations in order to influence the way they think. That's what Trump is doing. That's what Musk has done. That's what various others have done. And so you shouldn't just assume because somebody, goes there that means that they're all in on the agenda. And I dare say that many other people who attend aren't in on the agenda either. They're just simply people who see an opportunity maybe to sell a product or to network or something like that. And the World Economic Forum is definitely the sort of place where lots of networking is taking place. Here's one that cracked me up. You're one of them! Exclamation. That's how you get in. You're controlled opposition. I did tell you that, well, I'm in a restaurant now, so you are going to hear some clanging and such. They're making a wonderful Italian food here. I love Italy, by the way. Love Italian food. I enjoy the Italians. It's an awful lot of fun, but they're making food that I'll get to enjoy, later on. But do forgive me. It's very hard when you're traveling like this to find spaces with a decent background and where you have a decent internet connection where you can speak. So I need you to bear with me. When I'm on the road like this, it's just part of it. The idea that I'm one of them, that I'm controlled opposition is, absolutely absurd. It's absurd. I don't know what I'd have to do to convince you that if you believe that, you'll believe anything. No one has been more aggressive than I have been in going after the agenda of globalists, of atheists, of the Muslim horde than I have been. And I tend to think people who say that are themselves paid disruptors. They're paid to come on to channels like mine and say things like that in order to put doubts in the minds of other people, or their bots. And these days, unfortunately, when you respond to things like that, you frequently are responding to a bot. Another question. I thought after his last speech as president at the World Economic Forum, they weren't going to invite him back anymore. Did something change between Trump and the WEF in the last 4 years? Yeah, well, what changed is that he's now president of the United States, and you might be able to ignore the president of, let's say, Bolivia, but you cannot ignore the president of the United States. The president of the United States, that globalists recognize that it is the keystone to their agenda. The United States falls, every other anti-globalist populist movement in the world falls with it. Similarly, if the U.S. rises and rejects globalism, it imperils globalism everywhere. And so you can't ignore the president of the United States. There are heads of state that you can't ignore. Donald Trump is not one of them. You could ignore him, by the way, for the last 4 years because he wasn't a head of state, but they can't now. So now they're, suddenly kind of kissing up to him and saying, oh, it's wonderful to have the president here, speaking to us. They'll say that next year when he attends, but I'm pretty confident that he's going to let him have it. Do I think it's over for the WEF is a question that someone here asked. It's interesting. On another show that I do, WTF, World of Taunton and Fox, whenever you see that in the culture, that's what it's referring to. It's referring to our show. Lawrence has said that he thinks that wokedom and groups like the World Economic Forum, that it's over for them. I will not go so far as that. I'm extremely optimistic in the sense that I think that the globalists are on the run. I think the global left is on the run. But I also think of them like a virus. And what I mean by that is that they're ready at any moment that your guard is down to reassert themselves. So no, I don't think wokedom is dead, and I don't think the World Economic Forum is dead. That said, this year was a setback for them because, as I stated earlier, of the G7 nations, only one of them was there, and that was the outgoing, that is, heads of state of the G7 heads of state. Only one was there, and that's the outgoing chancellor rather, of Germany. That's not a good look. And I think they wanted to, kind of make it sound like nothing has changed. I think things have changed quite a lot. And I think with Trump's election, you're seeing populism picking up speed, patriotism, not just in the United States, but of other countries, I respect people who are patriots of their own country. I respect Italians, who love Italy, or French who love France. Those kind of movements are gathering steam around the world, and thus globalism itself is imperiled. And a final question here: can you get us footage from inside the WEF? That part is hard, because what I'm trying to do when I'm at the World Economic Forum is be as inconspicuous as possible. And for me to come in and then start doing things like this, holding up a camera and videoing things, is not a way to be inconspicuous. So you kind of have to rely on my report on what was taking place, or what I saw, what I experienced. On occasion, I'm able to get people on camera, but when you do, the tenor changes. It just changes completely, particularly if they think you're not in on the globalist agenda. Now, there's some video that I do want to show you here that I think is quite remarkable. Some of it we used a little bit last week, but I want you to hear a little bit from this particular presentation, this time at the World Economic Forum, where you have some policy wonks, you have some academics who are there speaking, and the whole presentation is about what it means for them and their agenda now that Donald Trump has been returned to the Oval Office. Listen to this. It's pretty incredible.
Trump has done something no person in the world has ever done before. A dead man, a dead politician, has risen. Somebody who, if we were 4 years ago at Davos, he's buried, dead politically, known to me. He's now returned. This is the greatest comeback in political history of a politician. And then, therefore, he thinks he can do anything.
We need to also factor in not only who's won, which is Trump, but who's lost, which is to say us. And I guess I would throw into that the epitome of the us who is losing here is Europe. That the European Union and by and large its member states have misread the direction where events were going. The causes that it is interested in, climate, human rights, some others, as well as the methods of diplomacy that it prefers, are simply being gradually kind of marginalized as something new, not necessarily something better, but something new moves into the center.
Now, I think that what was stated there is actually quite remarkable, because first of all, you have what I think is a very honest, a very clear-eyed assessment about Trump's victory. But then you have a guy saying, we lost, which I think is very interesting, because it's acknowledging that the people at the World Economic Forum kind of represent a singular political view, and that view is globalism. And so it's an acknowledgement, a bald-faced acknowledgement that they are not on board with Trump's politics. They're not on board with his anti-globalist views. And let me be clear on this. I said this in numerous interviews. The part of the reason that they are so fiercely opposed to Trump is because they recognize that he's not merely not a globalist. He is a fierce anti-globalist, meaning he's kind of announced, I'm coming for you guys. He said it in much more presidential terms, but he's making it very clear, I'm a wrecking ball to your agenda. I'm not on board with it, and I want to destroy it. And so the next 4 years are going to be very interesting. I'm hoping that as I return to Davos over the course of the next few years, and God willing, I will be able to do that each time I go, it just feels like it's dying a slow death. We'll see if that's what happens. I don't know if it is what will happen, but I hope that's what will happen. Now, the next video that I want to show you here, this also took place at the World Economic Forum, is something that feels like an SNL skit. It feels like something straight out of Saturday Night Live. And just in case you think there's something wrong with your audio, there isn't, but I'll explain to you in just a moment.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm Johanna Hoffman, founder and director of Design for Adaptation, and I am here with all of you to open this session by traveling into the future. Before we start, take a moment to find a comfortable spot where you feel a little ease and close your eyes. This is an eyes closed exploration in part. And take a breath. Take a breath in and take a breath out. On that exhale, all of us here, you, me, the wonderful people on this panel that we will hear from very soon, will have traveled 25 years into the future and landed in January 2050. Some of this climate action that has really intensified in the last couple of decades, Switzerland has invested, developed some different ways of engaging in preservation, conservation, and management of ecosystems. One example is it's become a place where nature has been granted legal personhood so that ecosystems' rights to exist, to thrive, to regenerate are codified and recognized in Swiss law. And that context has allowed for different people, different communities to bring lawsuits on behalf of rivers, forests, other ecosystems upon which we are intrinsically reliant and connected. So that's what's happening in Switzerland, a little window into what's happening at international scales. What does that look like where you live?
Is there something wrong with your audio? Because you could hear something going on in the background there. Well, if you're listening carefully, they're walking out on stage where the sounds of nature are being pumped out to the audience. You're hearing cicadas and you're hearing crickets and you're hearing frogs. And this doesn't stop through the whole presentation. This is playing in the background. And then you have her, and again, you're watching this and thinking, is this an SNL skit where she is telling everyone, close your eyes, like they're all doing some sort of transcendental, meditation thing together. See, again, this is kind of the religious aspect of the World Economic Forum, and there is definitely a religious aspect to it. I mean, there's an anti-religious aspect, but then the embracing of, weird religion, weird spirituality. And then you have her going on to say something quite outrageous. And what is that? That she wants to grant personhood to nature. Yes, personhood to nature. Now, these are individuals who don't want to grant personhood to real persons, to unborn children. But they do want to give it to trees. They want to give it to streams. They want to give it to mountains, these kinds of things. And this is really Romans 1 just really being, as I pointed out in a few other episodes of Ideas Have Consequences, this is where you exchange the truth of God for a lie, as Romans 1 says, where you elevate nature. This is what happens with these kind of people, where Romans 1 says you suppress the truth of God. And the result of that is that once you suppress the truth of God, you end up perverting truth, and then you pervert the life and nature itself. You arrive at some really wacky kind of conclusions. That's what these people are doing, is they are elevating nature and they begin to worship nature itself. Now, we've been moving in this direction for a very long time. As I pointed out to you, you have guys like Peter Singer, who published in 1975 Animal Liberation, which gave rise to the animal rights movement, and that has only been gaining steam as we move along. But these are individuals who, on the one hand, they would worship nature. So it's a kind of, as I told Steve Bannon, it's a neo-paganism. And by neo, I just mean that this is paganism reborn. We went through a paganism has always been kind of undercover. And by pagan, by definition of pagan, is pre-Christian, which always involves the worship of nature. But now it's reasserting itself, and it's reasserting itself with whack jobs, like this woman. They're almost always people. I like the way Dr. Drew put it in the interview that I did with him. These are luxury ideas. These are people who have the time to be silly. It's not third worlders who, as a rule, do these kinds of things, who are more concerned with feeding themselves and their families and finding work and shelter. These are the kinds of things that people do who have more time and money than they have sense, and they arrive at this kind of place. But this gives you a little glimpse of what the World Economic Forum, at least aspects of it, are like. Now, there'd be a lot of people at the World Economic Forum probably sitting in that audience who are putting their hands over their mouths and are chuckling through all of this and making fun of it. But let me tell you, paganism is really at the core of what the World Economic Forum really is. This is really a major part of it, and it's because they're more about nature than they are about mankind, and that really is in a sense where you're feeling the clash between the World Economic Forum and somebody like Donald Trump, because he's saying, I'm here to make life better for the American people first, and then, to the extent that I can for others around the world, but I'm here to improve life for Americans, for common, decent, hardworking American people. And that means bringing the cost of groceries down. That means bringing the cost of energy down. That means getting ridiculous government agencies and bureaucracies and regulations out of their way. That's not the way the World Economic Forum thinks. And that's because the people who attend there, particularly at the higher levels, they have a built-in contempt for democracy and for populism and for regular people. And that's because they see themselves as the self-appointed, the self-enlightened, the ones who have the right to tell the rest of us what to do. And hence the reason, as the posse will know, I refer to the World Economic Forum as the HOA from hell, the Homeowners Association from hell. That's what they are. They're kind of a global homeowners association that wants to tell you what you can and you can't do. But again, this whole concept of granting personhood to nature, it's absolutely absurd. But it's the kind of place where you arrive and in your mind it makes sense and it seems rational when you have rejected God and you begin to embrace all of the ridiculous things that then flow from that. You arrive at a place where human life matters less and where you begin to elevate nature. Now I want to show you something here that I thought was fun. Dutch public television, some journalists with Dutch public television, they reached out to me and asked me if I would do an interview. Now, they weren't guys that I knew. I'd never met them before, but they had come across my work and were very interested, and they wanted to devote a big part of the documentary that they were producing to my work and my perspective on the World Economic Forum. And this is what they did. I think it's quite excellent.
Ik ben onderweg naar het World Economic Forum in Davos. En spreekt daar Larry Alex Taunton. Hij is een Amerikaanse auteur, spreker en sociaal commentator. Bekend om zijn scherpe analyses bij onder andere USA Today, Fox News en The Atlantic. De laatste jaren richt Larry zich op het blootleggen van machtsstructuren binnen instituten zoals het World Economic Forum. Hij is de afgelopen jaren undercover aanwezig en maakt documentaires daarover. We spreken af voor het congrescentrum in Davos. Larry, what are your experiences when you went here undercover?
I am here to follow what's going on here at the World Economic Forum, and I'm just crashing the various forum meetings and just pretending to be one of them. And the result of that is that I get to hear some really interesting things that these people are discussing and promoting. And as I say, that when it really comes down to it, I mean, in the big picture, they're fundamentally elitist and anti-human. The World Economic Forum, what they sell is influence. There are 115 billionaires, 50 heads of state, 600 CEOs of major corporations, and they're all pushing the same kind of godless, utopian ideas. These are individuals they might be elected, some of them in their own countries, but not to do this, not to be part of the WEF, where they're promoting ideas that are fundamentally anti-human, where they feel that it's their place to lecture the rest of us on the way that we live. They're lecturing all of us on our carbon footprint. They're lecturing all of us on what we eat. And what we all see here are big gas-guzzling Mercedes and BMWs and private jets everywhere and helicopters. And that's what happens here at the World Economic Forum, meaning that this is the heart of leftist hypocrisy. It's like the heart of fascism right here.
What are the ideas that influenced the founding?
You have Kissinger's National Security Study Memo 200, in which he lays out the need for a kind of global version of Planned Parenthood. And you said, but what does Henry Kissinger have to do with the World Economic Forum? Everything, because do you know who his pupil was at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University?
No.
Klaus Schwab. Klaus Schwab. So there's a tight, connection there. Again, that theme of depopulation comes up. Go and read some of their documents. For instance, the first global revolution, which was published in 1991. When you go through it, for the most part, you'll find it pretty boring. But you'll find a few key lines in it where you're going, oh, wow, I realize what they're up to here. For instance, where they essentially admit that environmental catastrophe, apocalyptic narratives are what they would want to use in order to frighten populations into submitting to a globalist narrative. You can go and read Klaus Schwab's books, but those read like TV manuals. I mean, for the most part, it's not a smoking gun. The language is fairly careful, but you will find in it the language of a technocrat, and you will find in it the kind of the broader agenda and the way that these people think. The way I put it is like this. The average person gets up in the morning and grabs a cup of coffee and begins to think about their day. The kind of people who come to something like this, they get up in the morning, they grab a cup of coffee, and they begin to think about your day too. Because you see, they're the kind of individuals who are obsessed with the behavior of other people. The idea that somebody somewhere is free and happy, they just find intolerable. Now, the interviewer, his name is Jonathan, and I won't even begin to try to pronounce his last name, but I enjoyed these guys. And as the interview would suggest, the segment that they produced would suggest, they're quite sympathetic to my point of view, and they themselves are anti-globalists. But I want to also show you something else that they did that I thought was hilarious and that I thought was brilliant. I told you that there are other news agencies there and that they are there as newsmen. They're there as reporters, and they're on the street. So Jonathan and his crew were doing something that was akin to like Jay Leno's street talk, or what did he call it? I think he called it jaywalking, where they just go onto the street in his, and then to the Tonight Show and just speak to random people. It's become a fairly popular thing to do on social media. A lot of it is ridiculous and not worth watching. But this segment is, watch what they do right here.
Sir,
yes.
We want to tackle the climate change issue.
Yes.
So, he's our guy.
I'm a guy, yeah.
What do you know? What are you doing here in the first place?
Well, I'm here to do work around climate, peace, all the different issues that count. Yeah.
What kind of ideas do you have about climate change, about food or something?
Well, we built a program called the Cool Block Program that helps create carbon neutral cities.
Carbon neutral cities.
Carbon neutral cities, yeah.
And what kind of plan is that?
It's called Cool City Challenge, and it works with cities to help them learn how to reduce their carbon footprint and become carbon neutral, household by household, neighborhood by neighborhood.
And you want to implement that in other cities also?
Well, we've been implementing it all across California for a while, yeah.
And what about the food?
It's very important. One needs to eat lower on the food chain to lower your carbon footprint.
And what kind of food do you can't eat to lower your carbon footprint?
You want to have less meat.
Yes?
Yeah.
What's the replacement of meat?
Well, any kind of protein.
Any kind of protein?
Any kind of protein will replace meat, you bet.
Well, you want to try some bugs?
No thanks,
Yeah.
but I appreciate that you have that.
But you are thinking about lowering the carbon footprint. You are here with ideas with the World Economic Forum, and I offer you some bugs, the replacement for meat, and you don't want to eat it.
I don't want it right now, but thank you.
He's vegetarian. We're both vegetarian.
Well, this is vegetarian.
No, I'm not suggesting that's not good. I'm just not drawn to it right now.
Oh, but you don't want... Okay, just smell.
Smell, okay.
Very nice.
Can I smell? Let me smell. Interesting.
We do need to move on to our next thing, though. Good luck.
One last question. One of your ideas is already implemented in California.
Yes.
And you are thinking about ideas here so they can implement it in other cities.
Well, I've got a lot of different projects. That's only one of the projects.
Oh, what kind of projects do you more have?
Well, peace projects, development projects, knowledge projects, economic projects. I have a very large vision for how to make the world better, and all those pieces are part of it.
We're looking for scalable accelerator partners to just grow that network effect.
Well, to make the world better, it's a very good idea to have a referendum with people, so people can think for themselves. Are you in favor of referenda so they can vote on your ideas?
Well, it's a different strategy. It's actually empowering behavioral change. That's the actual idea. How to get a lot of people to change and adopt new behaviors. So it's not so much political as it is individual and citywide. So it's not referenda oriented.
Block by block, block by block.
Well, block by block.
Cool block by cool.
Go on with your trip.
Thank you, sir.
Keep up your good work.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for doing what you're doing.
Holy
Now, I think that was hysterical. I think that was very well done. And it feels like a, some kind of skit, but it's legit. The guy that they're talking to there is David Gershon of Empowerment Institute. Empowerment Institute. And here's a guy who is talking about that it's their goal to reduce the carbon footprint and they seek to do it block by block and so forth. And Jonathan just keeps asking him questions, not initially really revealing where he stands on the issue, but the guy starts to suspect, I think, when Jonathan is asking him about, what are the alternatives to eating meat? So these guys, again, WEFers, they're all against eating meat. And I should point this out to you. When I was in Davos, this time I was paying particularly close attention. I even I didn't post it on social media because my picture wasn't as good as I wanted it to be, but I was in one of the big cafeterias and all these WEFers are coming in and they are eating steak. I mean, it sounds like a joke, but they're eating steak and they're eating burgers and they're eating these big, huge slices of ham in sandwiches and things of that nature. And that just doesn't seem to me to be, consistent with their agenda. It just feels to me like, you're having some kind of Christian conference and then across the street, a conference on, let's say, the evils of alcohol, and then everyone goes across to the street and gets sauced. I mean, that's what this feels like. They're talking about how one of the ways to reduce carbon is to eat less beef, and for there to be less cattle on the face of the earth. And then they go over here and they're eating all these steaks. I didn't see anybody eating any bugs. I didn't see any WEFers eating any bugs. And of course, all these people are also arriving in their big luxury sedans and SUVs. So Jonathan then offers this guy, he offers him bugs that he happens to have in a Ziploc bag. And the guy's response to that is hilarious. But did you hear what he says? He said, "But I appreciate that you have that." Me right now, I don't want any bugs, but I really do appreciate that you have some bugs and that you're promoting it because it's really such a wonderful thing. Again, this is the way these people think, and it's really, really quite outrageous. And then, of course, inevitably, they say that they're both vegetarians. But I want to focus on this statement that the guy makes. Mr. Gershon says this: "I have a very large vision for how to make the world better." I have a very large vision for how to make the world better. Now, this is to me really characteristic of how these people think. And I want to compare it to, say, Christian mindset. The globalist, the leftist, the average WEFer, they always think in terms of the masses. They think in terms of the millions, the faceless masses that are out there. Not in terms of the individual, not in terms of actual people. Christian faith is the opposite from that. It really isn't, teaching or talking about, if you read scripture, it's not really focused on, go out and change the world, go on out there and affect millions of people. It's focused on your neighbor. It's focused on the one person who is right in front of you in that particular moment in time, as talking about helping that individual or sharing the gospel or whatever with people individually. It's about, doing the hard work of rolling up your sleeves and actually engaging with real people. The leftist mindset isn't like that. They don't want to engage with real people. What they want to do is they want to try to affect change top down rather than bottom up. And that's the difference between the two. So the leftist mindset is to legislate it through policy down, and the Christian mentality is to bring about change to a culture bottom up, affecting people one person at a time. I think this is quite fascinating because in my own experience in dealing with these kinds of people, they're not as a rule, there are exceptions to this, but they're not as a rule particularly generous. They're not as a rule the sort of people who involve themselves with their neighbors or with the needy. They think in terms only of the faceless masses. And that to me is a very different kind of mentality. And it's an evil mentality because it doesn't encourage you to engage with people at a grassroots level and get to know them and who they are. The left has always been concerned with the poor in the abstract, not in reality. And the Christian faith is about the reality, not the abstract. Do you see the difference? Hopefully I'm explaining this in a way that makes very good sense. But I have a very large vision for how to make the world better. That's a very WEFer kind of thing to say. And the WEF itself, the World Economic Forum itself, their slogan is improving the state of the world. So again, it's it's the way revolutionaries think. They want to change absolutely everything rather than actually doing the hard work of affecting lives one at a time. And to me, that's a really, really big difference. But I thought Jonathan did a brilliant job here of just holding up his Ziploc bag and saying, if you want some bugs, here are some. Go on, show us your commitment to this. And hence the reason I really wanted to come back to that statement, because it is very typical of the way they think. Part of what I hope to do on Ideas Have Consequences, and I hope if you're following along with my work and what I do, is I'm trying to show you, and I think my work is unique in this. When I say that I'm your man in the field, it isn't just for fun. I go and do these things. So sometimes it is fun. Sometimes it's, my work is never dull. But what I'm trying to do is I'm wanting to show you at a policy level, I'm wanting to engage with those people at a policy level in places like Washington and London and Paris and Davos, that I'm in those kind of circumstances, engaging with those kind of people who insulate themselves from their own policies. They're not affected by them. So Ursula von der Leyen, who's the EU, this is just by way of example, she's the EU Commission president. She's also a World Economic Forum trustee. And she spoke on, during their, kind of their opening ceremonies, as she does every year. And this woman is a classical leftist, sort, wealthy, aristocratic, and condescending. I mean, it just radiates from her condescension for anybody who doesn't agree with them or who should ever complain about anything that they do. But here she arrives at the World Economic Forum and in other places in an Audi A8. Now, if you don't know what an Audi A8 is, this is the German version, which is to say it's far more powerful than its American equivalent. So we're talking about a 12-cylinder, 585 horsepower, almost 3-ton beast of a car. Now, I have no problem with beasts of cars. I drive a big pickup truck with a big Hemi engine in it, which I like. I would be more than happy to drive an Audi A8. But you see, I don't go around the world lecturing people on their carbon footprint. And here she is lecturing people on their carbon footprint while she's in this arriving in this car that gets 11 miles to the gallon. I mean, 11 miles to the gallon. My Ram 1500 gets roughly double that. So, my carbon footprint is less than her carbon footprint. And yet she's the one who wants me to be on a bicycle or in a smart car. And see, they don't even see that as hypocritical. It is hypocritical, but they don't see it as hypocritical. You would think that even just for show, that they would say, you know what? I'm going to leave the Audi A8 at home because I'm going to the World Economic Forum and I'm going to lecture everybody on their carbon footprint. So I'm going to make sure that I arrive in a fully electric automobile so that, I don't look bad, doing this. They don't think like that. And it is because they're so elitist, they're so smug, they're so arrogant that they believe that they themselves are exempt from the policies that they would enforce on the rest of us. That's the way they think. They think, well, it doesn't matter that I arrive in a private jet and I helicopter from the airport into Davos and then get into, a 12-cylinder, beast of a car. I'm the exception. I'm allowed to do these things. It doesn't matter that I'm eating beef. I'm not going to eat bugs. I'm allowed to eat beef. But you see, you're a peon. You don't get to have these privileges. I get to have them because I'm on the top of the heap and because I'm a kind of a philosopher king. It's my job to rule over you peons and to tell you how to do everything. This is the way these people think. And really, one of the things I'll keep thinking on this, but it's not just specific policies and things that I want to make you aware of. Or talking about the World Economic Forum is the mindset. Because you see, if I can convey to you the mindset, then you can figure out the policies. You see, once you have the lens through which to understand these people, I could put a policy in front of you and you could reasonably guess what their position is going to be on it. What's their position going to be on global population? What's their policy going to be on the Christian faith? What's their policy going to be on American sovereignty or closed borders or Donald Trump? You can figure all that out yourself. So I'm trying to explain to you the mentality. I want to make sure that you get the mentality and the way these kinds of people think. So I hang out with those people in order to absorb that, in order to get that. But then I go downstream from the policies and I see how it's affecting people in real life. So when you would see me, for instance, following these migrant caravans all over South America through the Darien Gap and to the U.S. border, what am I doing there? Well, in part because the immigration issue itself alone is interesting. But you see, it connects with the other dots that we're tracking down in Ideas Have Consequences. This is the name of the show lived out in real life, in real space-time. The ideas that they're pushing at the World Economic Forum are played out in the lives of migrants that they've encouraged to leave their countries, but they want to see funded and helped all the way to penetrate the borders of the United States. That's World Economic Forum ideas downstream. So I'm looking at both. I want to hear what they have to say about it, but I want to go and experience it. And when I go to Davos, when I go to the World Economic Forum, I dare say I'm probably the only guy there who's actually seen the effect of their ideas. And that's what was fun last year. Some of you will remember that I crashed the meeting. Again, there was no digital ID that was required. I just walked into the building. And the next thing you know, I'm face to face with the former British Prime Minister, Theresa May, having a chat with her. Some of you will remember this. And what she was talking about, just by way of reminding you, is she was talking about all the wonderful things that the World Economic Forum, the UN, other globalist agencies are doing to help Ukrainian refugees, war refugees coming out of Ukraine and going into Poland. Well, it just so happened, I didn't even know that's what was going to be talked about in the meeting that I kind of blundered into. It just so happened I had just been in Poland along the border. interviewing Ukrainian war refugees. And here she is talking about not only all that they're doing for them, but what they're doing to prevent human trafficking of these refugees. She, presented it as these people arrived in Poland, and as soon as they get to Poland, you have all these human traffickers waiting for them. Well, the first book that I wrote in 2011, The Grace Effect, is in part about human trafficking in Ukraine. And I pointed out to her, I said, Miss May, have you been to Ukraine? I mean, I have many times. Have you been to Poland? I was just there talking to the refugees you're just talking about. And they said, you're not helping them. Now, she hadn't been there. But you see, here she is. And it's very typical of these kinds of conferences is these are people, it's a lot of virtue signaling about all the wonderful things that they're doing for other people. And they're not. And I could speak to it on a firsthand basis because I was there. And I also pointed out to her, do you think these people have to leave Ukraine to get trafficked? Human trafficking is far worse in Ukraine than it is in Poland. Far worse. And privately, she was like, yeah, well, I mean, that's Ukraine. I'm like, but you just gave a talk where you're wearing your little, Ukraine lapel pin and you're waving the flag and you're talking about how wonderful Ukraine is. Ukraine is a hellhole. That's the way these people operate. So I'm trying to do the hard work of working at both ends. I want to see how the policies are working out. I sit and listen to you guys say what you're doing. Now I'm going to go and see what's actually happening, what they're actually doing. And I'm glad to say that's given me the opportunity to talk to people very high in our own government in order to arm them, equip them for the reality of what's happening. Because our U.S. senators, advisors to the President of the United States, and the President himself don't have the opportunity to go and do the things that I do. I get to be a voice for them. I get to be, as Steve Gruber said on the interview that I did on Real America's Voices, for him, I'm the spy who goes out there and gathers this information. I think of myself more of a scout. I'm the guy who rides over, the next hill and comes back to tell you what's going on over there. But again, I want you to understand the ideas, the way these people think, because if I can impart to you that lens, that even if I miss to address a particular policy on this show or a particular event, I will have equipped you to help you navigate that issue without me having to be there. And so that's what we're trying to achieve here. Well, from here, I go back to Switzerland. I have to be in Switzerland next week. And then from there, I go to Cairo. And in Cairo, what I will be doing there will be very interesting. You won't want to miss that. But next week's episode will be from Switzerland, and then from Cairo, and then from there, I will be in Prague and Krakow, back in Rome, in Berlin. I have to go to so many places, and it gets very tiring. So please say a prayer for me. Please say a prayer for my mom as well. We've been, my mother, who suffered a stroke some months ago, she's been living with us, and for 4 months, we felt like we were getting her in a very good place, and good enough that I could leave the country. But these are tough things. They're very, very hard things to navigate, and they're new for me because when my father died, he just died. We didn't really go through a process of dealing with any of these things with him. So this has been Ideas Have Consequences with me, Larry Alex Taunton. Thank you.